Bien. Mesdames et messieurs, merci d'accueillir Matt Reeves et Andy Serkis. César. Yeah, water by this is a relief.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for being in Paris with this war for the Planet of the Apes. I mean, pretty, what a ride, shall I say, you know. Well, obviously we're here for the last chapter of the trilogy, so to speak. And I wanted to know, how would you describe, both of you, the journey you took where really the word war has so many meanings as we go through the journey?
Sure. I mean, you know, the thing about the movie was we were ending the last movie on the precipice of war. But all of these films have been very different. Rise is very different from Dawn, and Dawn is very different from War. And the thing about it is that the one thing that's consistent is that it's really the description of an epic arc from infancy to now you know the entire life of this character. And what was interesting to me was the idea of doing a war story where the war was the context, but the real war that we were focusing on was the war within this character's soul. The fight that he had to hold on to his empathy, which was sort of the bedrock of his character in the first two films. I mean, Andy so brilliantly described, you know, when I first got involved in the franchise, he was saying to me, you know, Caesar is an outsider, and he is, he's been raised by humans, but he's not human. And he is an ape, but he didn't grow up with apes. And so he is a unique bridge between both species and was really the only hope for peace in the last movie. But we know it doesn't become Planet of the Humans and the Apes, so the last movie was all about how it goes wrong. And this movie, what I really wanted to do was, I thought we would start and Caesar would be haunted by his failure and would be looking at his blind spot. For all of his empathy, he couldn't see what Koba really felt in relation to humans because he hadn't walked in his shoes. And the point of this movie was to take Caesar and make him walk in those shoes and to wound him so deeply that he was in danger of losing his empathy, which was the key to his heroic nature. And then that test would be the final test to whether or not he would transcend or whether or not he would be consumed. And if he does transcend, then he becomes the greatest ape in early ape history. He becomes like an ape Moses. So that's what we tried to do. And I think he does it.
I think he pretty much gets it. Yes. Question here for you guys. Parfait.
Bonsoir. Une question
Can you
pour...
stand up that we see you? Perfect.
Bonsoir. Une question pour Matt Reeves. Votre film est en grande partie muet, ce qui est assez inhabituel pour un blockbuster estival. Comment peut-on amener un studio à accepter cette grande part de muet et comment avez-vous construit la bande originale par conséquent?
Well, this is very rare for sort of a blockbuster type, but it's almost, there's very little, in a way, music, or it's very much about silence as well. How did you sort of build this film around this, which is so rare, and how did you decide for the soundtrack what effects you wanted or not?
Sure, you know, it's a long process of evolution because when we first start cutting the movie, it's Andy and the other actors in their mocap suits, and there are no apes, and there are not a lot of effects, so we have grand extension. So when we shot Andy, he might be surrounded by a crowd of hundreds of apes. On set, there were probably about 15 total. So in our first cut, we temp the music, we put in temporary music in place of what's missing. So the music tells the story initially. And so some of these grand scenes might have a very epic score because it's 15 guys instead of 800. And then as the effects start coming in, and I start working with Michael Giacchino, we craft the score and then we start paring away the music that we don't need because now the story is told by the visuals. And so in the last few weeks, I pulled out a significant amount of music. And that's how it arrived. It was a long evolution, a year-long evolution, because it seemed like there were certain things where we no longer needed the music to support the drama. We had the drama.
Question ici.
soi. Donc votre personnage, on le dit, a constamment évolué depuis le début de la trilogie. Donc j'aurais voulu savoir comment vous avez travaillé ce chapitre final et est-ce que Matt vous a aidé
Well, see, obviously your character has constantly evolved through the 3 films. How did you work on that evolution, and also how maybe Matt also, and you discussed it, maybe he guided you somehow or not? How would you describe that evolution for you as an actor as well?
Well, I mean, going back to Rise, and I'll try and make this as brief as possible, but going back to Rise, I always played Caesar really as a human in an ape's skin. So from the word go, he was brought up with human beings, so he always felt more at home with human beings and reflected human behaviour. And it's only when in Rise he reaches his teenage years and is separated from his father figure Will and is thrown into the sanctuary that he almost has to become to find his inner ape. So he's always, as Matt was saying earlier, you know, I've always played him as an outsider character who during the course of Rise is able to bring together the different species of apes, gorillas, you know, orangutans and chimpanzees, precisely because he's an outsider in a way and is able to be empathetic to all kinds. He's not tribal in that respect. So physically and emotionally, he was like this really gifted child. I played him as a gifted child who was physically very much like a young, excited chimpanzee. But then as he grew, you know, physically, you know, into Dawn, you know, once he's become this revolutionary leader at the end of Rise and leads the apes to freedom, he becomes this more of this leader figure and father figure. You know, he has children too in the second movie, and is creating a society. So Matt and I experimented with how do we take this physical development, emotional development, and start to bring it into, for instance, speech. How do we make the apes start to evolve? Because that was what Matt was very, very interested in when he came on board to shoot Dawn, the birth of an ape civilization. So Caesar then, you know, teaches and encourages the apes to think. What are their tenets of belief? What is the structure? What are their ways of living that they all adhere to, that they all believe in? And for that, I started to think of less of being, you know, ape. In many ways, less about him being an ape and the way that I was using my hands, the way that I was carrying myself physically. He was much more bipedal and emotionally being able to being much more kind of emotionally intelligent, I suppose. And this birth of a new language. And then in War, we decided that, and actually an interesting thing is, for instance, in Dawn, Caesar is trying to speak using human language the more that he connects with humans again. But we wanted it to feel like it was the birth of a language too. So I wore a mouth guard in my mouth to stop me from fully forming words properly, and they were very guttural sounds and staccato single words building up sentences very slowly. When it came to the last film, we see Caesar not only transform physically and become this aged, war-torn, war-ravaged leader, where I was wearing weights on my body to make myself heavier and pulled down by the whole experience, but he's becoming emotionally more closer to human beings and also and linguistically more articulate. So we decided to get rid of the mouth guard that stopped me from speaking. Otherwise, it would have been an incredibly long movie, as we've decided at the beginning of the shoot. But it was a sort of a gamble, because you don't ever want that character to feel like he's actually not an ape, that he is too human. And so we really experimented with the brilliant script that Matt and Mark had written and pared away at the dialogue until it felt absolutely right.
And there were places where we pushed the limits and then it broke. You know, Andy would speak, and we would do many different takes. He'd do one where he would articulate in a way that was more primitive, and he would have more struggle in articulation. And then he would do one where he'd be like, "Hey, how's it going?" Almost. And that didn't work. But, you know, there were some that we didn't know. It didn't work until it became an ape shot. There was one that was very casual. He said, "Let's go." He was talking to, when Maurice finds the girl, Maurice says, I don't think she can speak, there's something wrong with her. And then Caesar looks at Maurice like, we're not staying here, and says, let's go. And there was something about that final ape shot, we didn't know until the final ape shot. And the great thing about performance capture is that you can go back in and continue to write and refine. So we went back in and actually did the whole movie in the last, I don't know, the last phase of the movie. Andy and I went into the volume and we just looked at every line of dialogue and just pitched, not only for articulation, but just for the continuity of that vocal performance. And that's an amazing thing about mocap, that you can do that.
Question over there.
Bonsoir, félicitations à vous deux, premièrement. Ma question est pour Matt. Votre film est une des plus grosses sorties de l'année et par conséquent un des films les plus chers d'Hollywood de cette année. Donc ma question, votre film étant un film d'atmosphère, un film très psychologique, est-ce que vous n'entrez pas en conflit un petit peu avec les studios qui généralement, pour des films de ces budgets, préfèrent des films d'action et des films moins complexes que cela, moins intelligents?
Well, first of all, congratulations to you both. I mean, your film is one of the most expected and also one of the most expensive budget-wise of, let's say, this summer, maybe more. Do you find at times there's maybe a conflict brewing with studios which are more into big action and nothing but action and much less complex films than yours is?
This is the exciting thing about this particular franchise, because the summer films, and actually our film is not the most expensive by a long shot. We actually do keep the budget. It goes in. There's a tremendous amount of money that goes into the effects because they're very, very challenging. And I would say that over half the budget goes into the effects. So the shooting period is actually, it's not like we're making an independent movie, but it's tight, and we make sure that we fit in there, and we do that on purpose. This movie costs no more, really, than the last movie, but there are significantly more ape shots, which means the effects budget went up, but our production budget went down. But we were really careful in how we shot. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that, and there's a reason for that, which is that if we can do that, we can be a little bit more risky. And the other thing is that risk in these first two films that preceded ours have paid off. This franchise, the currency of this franchise, whereas the spectacle of these other summer films has to do with tremendous action and superpowers, here the spectacle is that you're going to go to the movies and you are going to empathize and walk in the steps of a creature that is not you and feel the emotions of that character. So that's an uncanny spectacle, right? You all became apes over the last 2 hours and 20 minutes, and that is the spectacle. So that means that the story is about character, and really the franchise, which from the beginning it's been this way, when we're looking at these apes, we're not looking at apes, we're looking at ourselves. And this is all about holding a mirror up to human nature and to our difficulty grappling with the different aspects of our nature. So we just so happen to be very lucky that this franchise does connect with audiences and provides an opportunity at a time when Hollywood makes a very narrow band of movies. Everything is based on some other property, something that people know. There has to be a level of familiarity. And what's been exciting about this particular franchise is it's based on an old franchise, which we both happen to love, but the films are actually new films. This story, the fun of it was that it hadn't been told yet. And the great thing also is that the '68 film, which I love and loved since I was a child, it removes the burden of the narrative question of what happens. There is no question. It becomes a Planet of the Apes. And that means that narratively we get to focus on another question, which is the how. And when you do stories that are narratively about how, they become about character and psychology and philosophy, and they become political, and they become more interesting. So we've been very fortunate.
Question over there, please.
Bonsoir, good evening. First of all, thank you very much for this amazing saga where each chapter is better than the one before, which is quite rare. I got two questions, one for Andy, one for Matt. So Reeves, I would like you to tell us about what's not in the movies, like the deleted scenes, deleted subplots, this kind of thing, because
What we
there
cut
is,
out?
for instance, in one of the trailer, a scene where we see bad apes about to be shot by a soldier, which is not in the movies.
Hmm.
And the second question for Mr. Serkis, how far are you in your Jungle Book project?
Well,
All right.
it's an interesting thing about marketing. Sometimes the trailers you see don't look like the movie we made, in my opinion. Which is not to say that they don't market the movie brilliantly, but there are times where I haven't seen the particular spot you're referring to. I will tell you there are absolutely scenes that we didn't include in the film. One of them, which is in a lot of the trailers, has a big, rousing, Patton-esque speech from Woody Harrelson. And in the American trailers, some of the international trailers, I think you see this. And it's not, that scene, it will be on the Blu-ray, but it doesn't, the story was so point of view driven from the ape perspective that anything that didn't come from that perspective needed to fall away. We had a subplot involving Preacher, where Preacher seemed momentarily like he might be someone that would be showing some sort of decency and empathy to Caesar, and Caesar sees him as an ally. And then after that big epic scene between Woody Harrelson and Caesar up in the colonel's quarters, Caesar turns to Preacher and says, if these soldiers are coming here, you need to get out of here. And Preacher looks at him and says, what are you talking about? I am not on your side. And it's a kind of a shocking moment. But it was not necessary because the story needed to be from Caesar's point of view and needed to go along that trajectory. This bad ape thing, I'm trying to think, I don't think there's anything of bad ape that we cut out. I'm curious to see this ad.
See?
Anyway, to that end.
So, Andy,
Look, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but yeah, Jungle Book, we are in a long period of post-production. I mean, when you think about it, it's very hard to translate the performances of an actor onto an ape, but it's potentially even more difficult to translate the face of an actor onto a panther or a snake or a tiger or a bear and have the same amount of believability that we have achieved in these movies, and so that's where we're at the moment. We're in post-production. We shot the film. We're closing in on the edit, and we're going through the same process that Matt has been living through this last year of the visual effects shots coming in and me looking at them and saying, well, this is what the actor did on the day, and this is what the performance that I want, and it's great, but it's not quite there, and so it's a very slow, iterative process. We have a wonderful central performance by a young actor playing Mowgli, Rohan Chand, a beautiful actor, and we have, I think, a very original and darker telling of the story, closer to the tone of Rudyard Kipling's book. Definitely not for a kind of 5 to 8 year old audience. More tonally similar to a kind of PG-13. This kind of movie, you know. And we'll be out next year. So it's an exciting time.
next question, where's the mic? Oh, great.
Bonsoir. Bon, je vais encore une fois dire merci et vous dire merci beaucoup pour ce film qui non seulement est une performance technique impressionnante, mais est également très très émouvant, j'ai trouvé. Ma question, c'est qu'en voyant votre film, c'est très difficile de ne pas penser aux conflits passés, aux conflits actuels. C'est difficile de ne pas penser aux camps de concentration, à ce genre de choses, et aujourd'hui à la crise migratoire qui touche notamment l'Europe. J'aurais aimé savoir dans quelle perspective l'actualité et ce genre de situation conflictuelle a pu vous influencer sur le scénario et la réalisation de ce film qui est quand même particulièrement politique. Merci.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for a movie that is both technically impressive and also very touching, obviously. Dani was saying that obviously when we see your films, it's very difficult not to think of past and present conflicts and wars. She couldn't help thinking about concentration camps, of course the migrants crisis that touches Europe everywhere, but also elsewhere. I mean, how much did today's conflict informed the script writing, informed the directing itself? I mean, basically, how political is the film?
Sure. It's a little bit of everything. Of course, we're aware of the context in which we make the film, and there are certain things, especially the refugee crisis and things like that, that we were hyper aware of. But when we set out to write the movie, we wanted it to be a war film that would be, it's interesting how much there are specifics, like the wall, that people ask us about. Now, this is a script that Mark and I wrote, almost 3 years ago, and the wall was not an issue, but what we were trying to do was to deal with the question of empathy and this idea that when you get drawn into conflict, that you can objectify your enemy and demean them and regard them as less than you, and it makes it easier to destroy them and to not see the commonality, the very, and that's a timeless issue about the human race. So that was the goal, and then there were certain things that would resonate, like, obviously we did think about concentration camps, and we did think about the refugee crisis, and the wall we did not think about, but it happened to become relevant as we were making the movie, which was weird. So, we don't set out necessarily, I would say, in the writing to take, it wasn't like we said, hey, let's do this and use that as the subject. It was more, let's dive into this question. And in the diving into the question, it made it seem relevant to what was going on. So it's a little bit of both. You can't not be aware of what's going on. And at the same time, we didn't say, hey, let's make a movie about the refugee crisis. So, yeah. And I think when we were making the movie, we did talk a lot about the relevance. And a lot of it, was not, we set out to make in a certain way, to be honest with you also, a biblical epic. It's an ape biblical epic. He becomes the ape Moses. And the wall, which is very charged politically, is actually more of something out of the pharaohs commanding them to build the pyramids. We watched Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, but that was not to say that isn't part of who and what we are. So.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting because it's actually within the DNA of these movies to always be zeitgeist and not overtly politically so. Because I think, the idea of creating a sort of culturally specific, detailed analysis of, any particular world event is really limiting the longevity of the film in a way. And, imagine watching this film in 10 years' time, well, how will that relate to whatever's going on there? It will relate, it will resonate, and it's still thematically about the same things, and that is I think the brilliance of what Matt has done as an artist and as an artist who's completely in tune with the world that he's creating a movie about is that it isn't just it's not a kind of Saturday Night Live topical piece of writing. This is something that hopefully, as I say, will be a classic piece of film that will be rewatchable and rewatched rather. For a long period of time to come, and we'll get different things out of it. But that, as you would if you watched the original 1968 version of Planet of the Apes.
Question here, there.
Bonjour, et encore bravo pour ce film. Je suis vraiment désolé de vous poser cette question, mais on a récemment appris que Matt, vous alliez réaliser les prochains films Batman à venir, et on voulait savoir si si vous pouvez nous en dire un peu plus, ou si vous prévoyez, vous avez déjà une direction ou quelque chose.
Well, all right, we have the Jungle Book question. We now have the Batman question, Matt.
That much I made out, yes.
Basically, could you tell just a few words, if you had already direction ideas and all that?
No, kidding. Here's the truth. The truth is that I have spent the last 3 years of my life, and actually the last 5 years of my life, making these movies, working with Andy and working in the intensive post, which nothing prepares you when I've done a number of different movies, but nothing can prepare you for the intensity of the post-production on these movies. And I am there from 9 a.m. to midnight, I haven't had dinner with my family during the week for well over, I don't know, 2 years. It's just like that's what you do. And so I haven't had the chance to work on the story or anything. They did approach me, and I do have an enthusiastic connection to it from my childhood, and I think what I respond to about Batman is what I respond to about Caesar, which is this idea of a tortured, troubled character who's struggling to do the right thing in an imperfect world. And I think the reason that I'm drawn to that is that the metaphors of those stories enable you to do something that I think is relatable. And it relates to this world, and it's something I can connect to. And everything I try to do from a point of view and a personal perspective. It's a weird thing to say that these two films that we've just made are very personal to me, but they are. And that's the way I approach everything. I would describe it as an emotional compass that's leading me through, that tells me if I'm connecting to the material, where the camera goes, and how Andy and I are going to talk about scenes and what we're going to do when we're writing the scenes. So it has to be personal in a way that may not seem immediately obvious, but I feel that way about Batman, and I hope one of the things that's really been consistent for me, though my work seems quite disparate in genre, is point of view. And I think that the filmmaker who made me want to make movies was Martin Scorsese when I was young. And through him, and like Taxi Driver, I discovered Alfred Hitchcock. And I realized, the power of cinema is this idea of putting you in this empathic relationship to someone who is not you, even someone who's doing things you'd like to think you would never do, so that you can question those things about yourself. Would I do that? And go through that experience. And so what I would hope to do when I do begin Batman is to use that same approach and to try and do a very point of view driven immersive story that I hope will be somehow emotionally connected to how I feel.
Yeah.
Hello guys, again congratulations for this movie. It's really, really amazing. Even for an old cynic like me, it's really good.
Thank you.
Speaking about cynicism, there's been a lot of cases in Hollywood recently where we learned that the movies was rewritten a lot during production or after production, that there was ton of additional shooting way after main production. And I must say that for this movie I didn't feel this at all. Like it felt the script felt very organic, very smooth. So I was wondering, am I totally wrong, or is it?
No.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Here, you know what's amazing about this? I didn't want to do Dawn. They approached me, and I didn't want to do it because I had resisted doing blockbuster films for exactly that reason. My fear was that I was going to lose myself. When I say that I want to tell a personal story, it's not for any kind of precious reason. It's because I think otherwise I will fail miserably. I literally don't know where I would put the camera if I didn't know how I was supposed to feel. And so when I came in to Dawn, they showed me the outline of what they were going to do. And I loved the franchise. I was so excited. And I loved, in particular, Andy's performance and the way that Weta had been able to faithfully render the emotions that Andy was giving in that movie. I was so touched. And so I was excited, and I read the outline, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this movie. And to my shock, and part of it maybe was, I'd never worked with them. Part of it maybe was they needed a director. But to my shock, they said, hey, don't walk away. Tell us the story you would do. And I thought it would be a Faustian bargain. I thought they would say, we'll do 60% your story and then 40% our story, and you got to have the showdown at Candlestick Park. And I still came up with the story that I would do. I pitched it to them, and I was waiting for the Faustian bargain, waiting for the reason to say no. And they said, okay, that sounds great. And I was shocked. I literally met with the studio executive, that's what she said, and I said, wait a minute, what? And she said, yeah, that's great. Are you in? And I said, am I in? Are you going to let me make that movie? And she said, yeah. And I said, all right, what's the catch? Because there's always a catch. And the catch on that movie was that we had to make that movie. Rupert had been developing a movie, and he had come to loggerheads with them, and they didn't agree on the movie they wanted to make. And this outline they had presented me was not Rupert's. It was something else they wanted to do. And I was like, I don't want to do that either. And so they said, well, you have to make this movie. We've already wasted a year from our point of view. You have to make this movie in an accelerated schedule. We have a release date. And I was like, wow, I've never done motion capture. I don't really know anything about this, but they're going to let me make this movie. And so I said yes, and we made that movie. And that is the movie we wanted to make, which was an incredible thing. And I think by virtue of the fact of that movie being successful, them starting to realize they could trust me, this movie, we wrote a script, and we shot that script. And so I was so worried about being involved with studio filmmaking, but these two movies are, for all of whatever flaws are in the movie, it's not because the studio forced us to do something. It's because in some way we didn't have the right idea at the right time. I failed some way in imagination, but whatever's there was what we intended to do. And this one in particular, we actually made the script that we wrote, which was an amazing thing, because you're absolutely right. In most cases, in Hollywood films, the script goes through tremendous number of writers. And the only writers on this film were me and Mark. We sat together and wrote via Skype over, we shared a computer, and that's what we did. And the other contributions come from the actors. They have, I love to explore. And so Woody Harrelson had brilliant ideas. We put them in the script. Andy had great ideas. We put them in the script. We made the movie the way you would imagine you would make an independent movie, except it was a $200 million movie. And I don't know that I'll ever have that experience again, but it's what I'm fighting for.
Well, so let me just add something, because when I sat down with Matt not long after we'd finished making Dawn, and he met me in the Intercontinental Hotel, which is right next to the Fox studio lot, and he said, Andy, I want to meet you. I want to tell you the story of War for the Planet of the Apes. And he sat down. This was about 2.5 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's about 2.5 years ago, before he wrote a word of it, before any of it was down on paper. He told me the story in real time. It took an hour and 3/4, and I was supposed to, weirdly, I was actually going to watch Rupert Wyatt's film The Gambler at the cinema, and it was getting late, and he was reaching about 2/3 of the way through the movie, and I was thinking, shit, I'm never going to make this. I'm not going to make Rupert's film, and I couldn't take I was like listening with, I was agog at what Matt was describing, with this biblical epic and so on. But the point is, he knew, and the film that I watched 3 nights ago when we had our first screening was pretty much exactly the film that I remember Matt telling me that night. I mean, it was extraordinary. It was in your head, the whole thing. It was amazing.
It was really, I have to thank Fox for that too. I mean, I don't know what it's like on other movies, but I have these two films I have been able to make the stories that I wanted to tell with these incredible artists who are all working together at the top of their field, working with Andy.
Question here.
Bonsoir et félicitations pour le film, j'ai beaucoup aimé. J'avais une question sur les personnages humains. Les 2 principaux sont très différents, donc on a un militaire et une petite fille. Mais j'aimerais savoir comment vous les avez approchés. Et parce que, par exemple, la petite fille, j'ai beaucoup aimé qu'elle soit une enfant, donc qu'elle soit censée représenter le futur, mais qu'au final, c'est soit elle qui contamine Woody Harrelson à la fin. Et du coup, j'aimerais savoir aussi quelles idées vous avez apportées au scénario. Merci.
So it's two-part question. I mean, first of all, the first question would be about the 2 humans really that are so powerful in the movie and that are so completely different. The colonel, of course, and the little girl, who's supposed to be innocence and all that, but she's the one who actually contaminates.
Yes, she does.
And so that's what she was saying. And it's interesting. How did you approach these characters, and how maybe did you cast the little girl? I mean, how was the process in your mind?
Sure. I mean, what I wanted to do, see, when I came and I saw Rise, and part of what my pitch was for Dawn, was that I thought, wow, I came to see this movie that I thought was about James Franco, and he was terrific in the movie, but it wasn't about James Franco, it was about Andy Serkis as Caesar. And in the second movie, when they showed me the outline, it wasn't as weighted towards Caesar as I thought, and that was part of my pitch. I was like, wait a minute, you've got to start in the civilization that the apes create. You've earned it. The big surprise of that movie is that it's actually Caesar's movie. And so we tried as much as possible to make that one Caesar's movie, but the other thing is that because of the jump in time, you couldn't neglect the human point of view. It was critical. It was you were going to go from a world that looked like ours to the viral post-apocalypse. So it was important to tell this kind of split story, but it was definitely weighted towards Caesar and the apes and Koba. But this one, I finally got to do the thing that I really wanted to do, which was tell a story that was exclusively ape point of view. There are no scenes in the movie that don't have apes, which is, by the way, very challenging because those shots are very expensive and they take a lot of planning and money. But I wanted the humans to all be encountered from Caesar's point of view. So the Colonel was meant to look like a monster as you first encountered him. And you were supposed to be filled with the rage that Caesar had as he goes up the Apocalypse Now River, which is going across the landscape of California and up into the Sierras. And then when he finally reaches the Colonel, I wanted there to be a moment where, as Caesar realizes that the Colonel is not so easily dismissed in his motivations, that we would realize that. And so I wanted to humanize that character. I thought you couldn't have a villain in a straight sense. You needed to have an antagonist who there's nothing that the Colonel says that's wrong. He actually is right about everything he says. And not only that, but there are ways in which he's like Caesar that Caesar would prefer not to admit. And so what was great was having Woody, he didn't want to play a villain. He wanted to come in and humanize this character. And that when I said that we incorporated a lot of his ideas, he had a lot of ideas and we incorporated in the script. And then the other thing is he came into the process and didn't realize what it was. He was excited about it, but he was like, I don't know what it's going to be. And usually in these CG movies, you have the person who's acting to the CGI character is often acting to nothing, to a tennis ball. But that's not how we do it. We do it with actors together. And what he was going to be acting opposite was Andy Serkis. And he was like, whoa, this guy's amazing. And they had a rapport that created something very special, I think. And with Amaya, what we did was I had a casting call, and we saw a lot of young actresses. And Amaya came in, and immediately there was something special, and I just threw the script away. And I had Deb Zane, who was our casting director. I said, I don't want you to talk. I just want you to act like an ape. And I want to see what she does. And I told her, I said, I want you just to react. And we did an improvisation that was about 15 minutes. And she was endlessly fascinating to watch. And I was like, wow, she's extraordinary. And so that's why I cast her. And then these guys created a relationship with her. And Karen in particular, who plays the orangutan, Maurice, they're so close. I mean, they became a family. And what was great was that was the story. The story was, here was this human who was devolving with these apes who were evolving, and they were meeting somewhere in the middle, and by the end, she's an ape. And that was actually true of the process. I had Terry Notary work with her so she could express herself with her body so that she wouldn't literally start moving like the apes, but she would have a little bit of that in her gait.
Question. Oh yeah, there was a second part of the question, sorry. If I remember, you wanted to know, as you mentioned, that Andy had also put some ideas into your script and your thinking process. What did he also add to the script? Is that what you wanted to? The second part of the question, yes. Because you said earlier that
I'll
you
tell you.
incorporated some things.
It's funny because it's over such a long period of time that I forget. But now I'm remembering right now because literally this is the way the process is. Like it's so organic. Well, it's a good one. So we were talking about the moment where the Colonel and he face off, and there was the moment where he puts the gun and all he wants to do is kill him, and he goes through this turmoil because he's been waiting for this moment. This man killed his wife and child, and Andy was talking to me and he said, I think originally in the script, he just put the gun down and I believe in some way he walked away. And Andy said, I think that given how he's suffering, I should put the gun down so that he can reach it and that he can kill himself if he so chooses. And that's exactly what we did, and it was brilliant. It was great.
Very powerful moment.
Yeah.
Ici.
Alors, bonjour. Encore une fois, bravo pour ce film. Alors, j'aurais deux questions pour Matt Reeves. Donc, la première question, c'est tout le long du film, on peut voir des clins d'œil visuels à Apocalypse Now. J'aurais aimé savoir pourquoi particulièrement ce film-là. Et deuxièmement, on peut voir également que ce film, c'est la fin de l'histoire de César. Mais est-ce que c'est également le début peut-être d'une autre histoire à raconter?
Well, congratulations again for this film. I mean, it's a two-part question again. I mean, it seems that there are lots of references, visual references to Apocalypse Now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you comment on that?
True. We watched a lot of war movies when we were beginning. And Apocalypse Now, I mean, Francis, like when I talk about the influences, the filmmakers who wanted me to be, who wanted me, that's very Freudian. The filmmakers who made me want to be a filmmaker, they were those 70s American filmmakers. I love Martin Scorsese, I love Francis Ford Coppola, they were my heroes. So Apocalypse Now was a real mind blower for me when I saw it. And so when we were starting to write, we did something, Mark and I, that everybody thinks Hollywood writers do, but which no Hollywood writers have ever had time to do, you know, in the current era, which is we sat down and we watched a movie or two every day. So we watched Apocalypse Now, of course. We watched Bridge on the River Kwai. We watched The Great Escape. We watched Ben-Hur. We watched The Ten Commandments. We watched The Outlaw Josie Wales. We watched Unforgiven. We watched Paths of Glory. We watched El Cid. We watched all of the Planet of the Apes movies. We watched a lot. But there was something about this Kurtzian idea of going up the river and trying to, and moving toward this mystery, the mystery of the brutality of this character, and then mixing that with this idea of that being connected to a sense of personal rage and a revenge story, so that when he got there, when the truth was revealed about who he was, it was meant to be a kind of, I mean, that's, those scenes in Apocalypse Now where Marlon Brando is talking at the end of the film, I find them incredible. And so we absolutely made references to a lot of these films. There were Sergio Leone references. I mean, there were a lot of, I wanted the movie to be like a Western. There were, Once Upon a Time in the West is one of my favorite movies. So, yeah, I wanted to make it personal, and part of the personal is that I love movies, and the movies that were inspiring us in a way informed the movie certain ways visually. John Ford.
Yeah, and it's very much the heart of darkness anyway. The
Oh,
theme,
absolutely.
it's completely that.
Yeah, completely.
With that. And the second part of the question was, let me say, oh yes, this is obviously the end, my friend, for Caesar. But is it the beginning?
Wait, who says?
We wonder. Many references here at this table. But I mean, is it maybe the beginning of something else in your mind that's already been brewing?
Yeah, we've talked about that. We'll see. I mean, one of the things that when Mark and I were trying to lay out the story, as I said, we know the end of the story. It becomes Planet of the Apes. And the world of these films is still quite different from the world of that film. And the idea being that it's like a giant ape Russian novel, chapter after chapter, getting us closer. It's like Tolstoy of the Apes, you know. And the whole idea that we wanted to plant that implied a possible future was the notion of bad ape is the notion that when this virus wiped out humanity, that it didn't spread only one way, and that it spread back to apes. And that these apes might not just be in clusters of one, but there might be colonies of apes. And these apes would not have had the benefit of Caesar's leadership and the empathy and integrity that he tried to instill into his family. And so future stories could involve the descendants of Caesar and the characters that we have come to love, and how they grapple with conflicts that are not just human and ape, but actually ape and ape, and would be a continuing sort of study of our nature and philosophical exploration. Possibly. If Andy wants to do it. Let's put it that way.
Only if you do.
Oh well, we heard it. Last question here.
Okay, so thank you for the movie, it was great. Et je suis désolée, c'est pas vraiment une question, mais j'aimerais beaucoup entendre la voix de César en vrai, si c'est possible. Merci beaucoup.
Okay, so this is not really a question, but it could be a beautiful ending to this. Could we hear Caesar's voice right now?
Well, Caesar's voice, sort of, as I say, kind of evolved. So in Dawn, when we first started hearing him speak, he was much more guttural, as I say, much more direct, and so he would say, home, family, future, like that. And then, but then as we started to work on Caesar's voice in this one, we as I say, we had to kind of speed it up and make him more articulate, because otherwise it would have been a very long film. And so I'm trying to think of something from the film now. But he began to say, he would say, I did not start this war. The ape who did is dead. I killed him. His name was Koba. So you're trying to keep in still a sense of the apeness of the character without ever, as we discussed, ever tipping the balance into this casual guy trying to sort of behave like an ape. Anyway, so that's it.
Present, I hope you heard the silence when you were talking as Caesar, and I hope you know how sad we all are that you're gone, so to speak, but you stay.
You know, I've got to say, I've just been on the Quotidien TV show, and I heard for the first time Caesar speaking French, and it was such a shock. I was like, what?
Did you guys see it in French?
No.
Oh, good, wonderful. I thought, wait a minute, this is France. It's supposed to be subtitled. What's happening?
No, we do like to listen to the original thing. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
And Serkis.